Welcome, listeners of WHFB AM 1060 and WIMS AM 1420, as we launch another edition of the Green Radio Network. Here on the Green Radio Network, we'll bring you a variety of green topics and the latest information on green technology and transportation. This program features environmental leaders throughout northern Indiana and the entire nation. The Green Radio Network is sponsored by NERPC, the Northwestern Indiana Regional Planning Commission, and the award-winning South Shore Clean Cities. Both entities are leaders in the environmental industry and work together to bring cleaner air and more sustainable living to northern Indiana. Now to introduce Carl Lisek, Executive Director of South Shore Clean Cities and the host of the show.
Well, thank you for that introduction, and today our guest is Mr. Ken Parrent. He's Director of Biofuels for the Indiana Corn Marketing Council and Indiana Soybean Alliance. Ken, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Carl.
It's great to have you here, and we're just excited about all the great things that are going on with ethanol and biodiesel throughout the state of Indiana. So why don't you tell our listeners, Ken, a little bit about Indiana Corn Marketing Council and the Indiana Soybean Alliance and what they do.
The Indiana Corn Marketing Council and the Indiana Soybean Alliance represent corn and soybean growers here in the state. The Corn Marketing Council is a corn checkoff program. Producers that grow corn here are subject to a 1/2 cent a bushel levy on the bushels that they market, and then those funds are used to promote things like ethanol, research on production, and other demand sources for corn and soybeans.
I see. And so I know ethanol is obviously very prevalent with corn here in our state in Indiana. But why is ethanol and why is it blended into gasoline?
Ethanol basically replaces things like lead in the gasoline supply. It's a clean burning, locally produced fuel. We have 14 ethanol plants here in the state producing over 1 billion gallons of ethanol. And virtually all of the gas sold here in the state has 10% ethanol blended into it.
Mm-hmm. And many people are always asking, can my car run on ethanol blended fuel? And what's that answer?
Well, if you've got most automobiles here are using fuel that already contains 10% ethanol. If you've got a vehicle that was built in 2001 or newer, it can use up to 15% ethanol. And we're starting to see some of that, particularly in this area. There are higher blends available, but you would need a flex fuel vehicle to be able to use those higher blends, like an E30 or an E85.
I see. And then what blends may our listeners be seeing at our local fuel stations?
Well, and most of you are probably using E10, also known as regular gasoline in most cases. But we're starting to see some E15 up in this area, particularly at local Family Express stores, even here in Michigan City. They have 2 locations where E15 is available.
And so some drivers have concerns over E15. Could that harm their engines? And can you address this issue? Again, this seems to be a huge issue that we hear about in the media all the time.
Sure. E15 is the most tested fuel that's ever come to market. The EPA ran 6 million miles worth of tests prior to its approval back in 2011. And since then, the consumers have driven more than 10 billion miles
10 billion.
on E15 without any reports of damage or any sort of problems.
And again, I think we've been promoting ethanol here in our state since we've been involved with the Clean Cities group. And I remember back, Ken, in like 2006, 2007, when we actually had the nation's first ethanol biofuel corridor from Gary, Indiana, all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. And I think really what we've seen, across the United States with a lot of the projects that we're involved with now, that was the first corridor project that was very successful. All those stations that we work with are still selling E85. They're still selling, bio-based fuels. And, so it's exciting to see that almost after, that many years that we continue to see, ethanol based products still being used by consumers. So, as we talked about the higher blends of ethanol for flex fuel vehicles, how do people know if they've purchased a flex fuel vehicle?
Well, in many cases, your vehicle will have a yellow gas cap, and it will probably say that you can use E85 right on the gas cap. Some of the newer vehicles don't have a gas cap, but they're in that fuel inlet. It will identify the fuels that vehicle was manufactured for, maybe up to E15 or possibly to E85.
I see. And then we talk about corn, obviously, with ethanol. And does that raise the cost of food as Americans? I think, there's this misconception that we hear, again, through media, that this raises the price of fuel.
But, it's interesting. A United Nations study recently highlighted the fact that food prices have been trending lower since 2012. At the same time, ethanol production has grown dramatically. So there does not appear to be any correlation between food prices, higher food prices, and the fact that we're using ethanol for fuel. The corn that we grow in the field for the most part is not grown for human consumption. Mm-hmm. It's largely animal feed, as opposed to the sweet corn that you buy in the store or in canned form. The animal feed, a lot of it comes back out of the ethanol plants. About a third of each bushel comes back from ethanol plants as distillers' grains, which are then used to feed cattle, hogs, and poultry.
I see. And then as you talk about performance of vehicles, again, I think there's been a lot of studies, there's been a lot of information or a lot of misinformation in regards to fuel economy, performance of vehicles. Can you address that a little bit?
Well, personally, I've used as high as E30 in my flex fuel vehicle and really not seen any change in mileage at all. And typically those fuels are available, at a discount to regular gasoline. I typically burn E85 because that's the most widely available, and I see about a 20% reduction in mileage. But, I'm often able to price that fuel at a 25% discount.
I see.
So, look at it on a cost per mile basis, as opposed to a cost per gallon. I think you'll be surprised that E85 in most vehicles is really quite economical.
Sure. And again, I think, one of the things that we have here in Northwest Indiana is we've got non-attainment. And, air quality is very important to all of us. But here, and we're getting into the summer driving season, we're seeing a lot more with air quality action days. We're going to start seeing some of those things. And why is it important for people to really use some of these cleaner, more renewable fuels?
For one thing, ethanol reduces greenhouse gas emissions by more than 40%. I think 43% is the number that I continually see. But even more important than that, it reduces particulate emissions, some of the heavy stuff that we're breathing in. Plus, gasoline contains some known carcinogens,
sure,
such as benzene and toluene, and those are in the air that we breathe. You don't see it, but they're there. We've also seen a high incidence of asthma,
absolutely,
in areas, in high traffic areas among children. And you're not going to get that with the higher ethanol blends, or at least it's going to help a great deal in reducing those emissions.
Well, Ken, we're going to take a break right now. You're listening to the Green Radio Network here on AM 1420 WIMS Radio and AM 1060 WHFB. I'm your host, Carl Lisek. I have more with Ken Parrent, Director of Biofuels for the Indiana Corn Marketing Council and Indiana Soybean Alliance, right after this. You're listening to the Green Radio Network on AM 1420 WIMS Radio and AM 1060 WHFB. This is Carl Lisek. We'll be right back after this message.
There's nothing more important than spending time outdoors with your family. That's why it's so important to do whatever you can to keep our air clean. It's good for the environment and good for the health of your friends and family. Take a closer look at how poor quality is affecting our community. Across the 3 counties of Northwest Indiana, recent studies from the American Lung Association show that 9% of adults suffer from asthma, 4% live with chronic bronchitis, 38% have a form of cardiovascular disease, and 10% of the children in Lake and LaPorte counties struggle with pediatric asthma. Now, the number of adults with asthma is nearly that of adults with diabetes. Consider how diabetics make adjustments to their diet in order to be as healthy as possible. Everyone can make adjustments to improve air quality and the quality of life for those who live with asthma and other lung diseases. Northwest Indiana, clean air, think green, breathe easy. A message from NERPC.
Thank you again for joining us on AM 1420 WIMS Radio and AM 1060 WHFB on this edition of the Green Radio Network. Well, welcome back to the Green Radio Network here on AM 1420 WIMS Radio and AM 1060 WHFB. I'm Carl Lisek of South Shore Clean Cities, here to bring you the latest information on green projects and topics across the nation. Our guest today is Mr. Ken Parrent. He is the Director of Biofuels for the Indiana Corn Marketing Council and Indiana Soybean Alliance. Ken, we were just talking about all the great things that are going on here in our state with ethanol, but I think one of the things that we tend to not talk about is how important ethanol is to our economy. I mean, let's talk a little bit about that. Why is it so important?
Well, several years ago, we funded an economic impact study of the ethanol industry here in the state, and found that we contribute more than $1 billion to the state's economy. Directly employ more than 500 people with good paying jobs, mostly in rural areas here in the state. Places where good jobs are hard to find. We provide property taxes in those communities and indirectly support probably another 4,000 jobs over and above the 500 plus direct jobs.
Interesting statistics. So with some of the research and things that are being developed here with ethanol in our state, what are some of the things that maybe we can expect to see? Obviously we're trying to see more stations being developed throughout the state of Indiana, but is there anything else that we might be able to see, in the near future with ethanol?
Well, I think you're going to see a proliferation of E15 here in the state. Mm-hmm. I'm confident that within several years, E15 is going to be the primary fuel out there, not replacing E10. E10's not going to go away. And I think there is a misconception that if E15 comes into the market, you're not going to be able to buy your regular gasoline. And that's not the case. Mm-hmm. But hopefully we're going to see more people who are driving flex fuel vehicles understand the value of the higher ethanol blends. We have more than 500,000 flex fuel vehicles on the road here in the state. And a lot of people don't even know they're driving a flex fuel vehicle. So there's a need for education in terms of what kind of a vehicle they have and the fuels that they might be able to use.
Sure. As we talked off air before, we were discussing, some of the communities that we work with through our Green Fleet program. And, a lot of the communities are driving these flexible fuel vehicles that are not even, taking advantage of some of the financial incentives that are available. And, educating them on, the important use of E85 and E15 and E10. So, so we're spreading the gospel, if you will, Ken, with them. So I know the Indiana Corn Marketing Council is partnering with Family Express and some other groups, but for some exciting local events here in Northwest Indiana, showcasing the power of ethanol this summer. Tell us about those.
Well, for one thing, we are an event sponsor of the Cat Can Do American Ethanol Boat here at the Great Lakes Grand Prix in August. Mm-hmm. And we're really excited about that. Cat Can Do set a speed record a summer or two ago. I think they hit something like 186 miles per hour. And they run a fuel that is 90% ethanol. Since they switched over, they've increased their horsepower, mm-hmm. and it's one fast boat.
Again, I think, you hear this misconception about the use of ethanol in marine applications, and here we've got a racing boat going 185 miles on almost 90% ethanol, which is remarkable. And so I know that you're planning some events in and around the race, so people will be able to get up close and personal with this boat and, learn more about ethanol and some of the great things that are going on, not just in Northwest Indiana, but throughout the state. And again, I know you'll be participating with Family Express on those activities. Anything else that's coming up? I know there's some other kind of races that you're working on throughout the state of Indiana.
Well, NASCAR has run E15, a 15% ethanol fuel in their vehicles now. They've run over 10 million miles going back, I believe it's 6 years now. And so they'll be at the Brickyard in late July, I think the 25th. We're also going to be doing some promotions in Valparaiso at Family Express stores on that weekend. And we'll be in Fort Wayne that same weekend as well, promoting E15, E85, and Lassus Brothers in Fort Wayne also offer E20.
Wow. And again, I think, that'll be an opportunity for people to learn more. I believe there'll be some opportunities for you to get discounted fuel. And, we're really excited about that. And, our partnership, obviously working with Family Express here locally and several other stations across Indiana. And again, I think, you're seeing a lot more involvement with some of these national brands that potentially have worked with you in implementing or giving consumers other choices.
That's really what we'd like to see is consumers having options at the pump. Mm-hmm. And we are seeing more of that. We've got natural gas, we've got propane, electric vehicles mm-hmm. now. So, and a lot of these stations are adding the ability for consumers to buy a wide variety of fuels.
Sure. So how can people learn more about your organization and more about ethanol?
Well, there are a number of websites that offer information. Let'sGetEthanol.com mm-hmm. is a kind of a recent site that's popped up with more information. FuelFreedom.com is another one. And, our own website, incorn.org, provides some information as well. And that's currently being updated. But that will give you a hint and an update on our activities mm-hmm. that are going on out there.
And I know that the Indiana Soybean Alliance and corn marketers are involved with the upcoming state fair, and you'll have educational sessions there. I believe you have a booth there, and that's coming up very shortly.
Right. If you haven't been to the Glass Barn at the Indiana State Fair, mm-hmm. It's really a great educational opportunity. Now, that is focused on soybean production, but people that go there and bring their kids especially are really fascinated by it. It's on the north end of the state fairgrounds next to the Farm Bureau building, and you'll love it. I guarantee it.
So, Ken, as you talk about, your legacy, if you will. Let's talk about what Ken Parrent wants to see when people talk about ethanol. How should we remember, the Indiana Corn Marketing Council and Indiana Soybean Alliance?
The Indiana corn growers have been committed to biofuels mm-hmm. And the Soybean Alliance as well. And they've put a lot of money where their mouth is in this industry. In terms of grants for fuel retailers that need some help in mm-hmm. funding infrastructure for higher ethanol blends, and we're going to continue to do that. A year ago, almost 2 years ago now, we took advantage of the USDA's Biofuels Infrastructure Partnership. The state of Indiana received nearly $1 million from that program, and the Corn Marketing Council put up matching funds of more than $500,000 to help move that program along. And I see more of that in the future.
And it's wonderful. And again, I think you would say that Northwest Indiana did had a huge effect of using a lot of that money here locally in our economy. And, we're very successful with, working with you and seeing some of our retailers, take advantage of some of those grants. And again, I think you're going to see, more stations coming online throughout the state of Indiana that are using these higher blends of ethanol. And so, it is exciting. Again, we talk about consumers, but we also talk about clean air. And I know you talked a lot about, some of the studies that have been done and with higher asthma rates and some of the pollution causing. And now that we're in the summer season, we've got the summer season or the construction season, and we see all this equipment, all this amount of idling that we're doing, stuck during these traffic jams and stuff. And so, we're just excited to see the inception of these higher blends of alternative fuels or renewable fuels, and how we're really helping our economy, our local economy, but we're also helping our health. And so, as we come to the close of our show, Ken, is there anything else that you'd like to talk about?
Well, just touching on the environmental aspect. Recently, the American Lung Association released what they call their State of the Air report. And frankly, I was shocked. Indiana scored very poorly on that, in particular Indianapolis. And, I look around and I don't see a lot of pollution, but it's there. We just don't realize it's there. And, anything we can do, I know this Paris Agreement is controversial right now.
Sure.
But here locally, there's a lot that we can do to help clean up the air.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, as we talk about, some the non-attainment issues, and that's been debated. There's a summer legislative committee that's studying, getting us out of non-attainment. And, we've been asked to actually help educate and supply some information on that with our state. And, we're going to be working with you on helping to educate more of our legislators on why it's so important for our area really to, work on, cleaner air initiatives. So, again, what is your website?
Incorn, INCORN.org. Or you can also go to indianasoybean.com and learn about biodiesel there.
And, keep up the great work. We look forward to a great summer of events. And, there's going to be so many great things that are going to be happening here in Northwest Indiana for people to learn about some of these biofuel activities. So we look forward to working with you on promoting some of these events. And any last closing thoughts as we end our program?
Oh, we look forward to seeing the local people here at our events this summer.
Yep, and that will do it for today's edition of the Green Radio Network. I'm your host, Carl Lisek. Thanks again to our guest, Mr. Ken Parrent, Director of Biofuels for the Indiana Corn Marketing Council and Indiana Soybean Alliance. Be sure to join us again on AM 1420 WIMS Radio and AM 1060 WHFB for the next edition of the Green Radio Network, and visit us online at southshorecleancities.org. Thanks for joining us, and remember, it's never too late to begin your environmental legacy. Thank you, everybody.